right, welcome everybody to today's Wednesday webinar event, Perspectives on Reopening and the Future of Design. My name is Erica. I'm the Director of Operations for TEA. Before we get started, I have a few things for you guys. If you could please edit your names to be your first name, your last name, and your company so that we can all get to know each other a little better. And then if everyone would please turn off their cameras so that it's easier for us to spot our speakers for today. That would be perfect. Also, you all will be on mute as a courtesy as well. And lastly, if you have any questions throughout the panel, please message them to me privately and we will do our best to get to them at the end. And with that, I would like to introduce you all to Brian Sands with HKS, and he is our TEA International Board Treasurer. Brian, all you.
Great. And thank you, Erica. And good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. This is a truly global affair, and we appreciate all of you joining us today for our webinar, Perspectives on Reopening and Designing for the Future. Again, my name is Brian Sands, and I lead the Leisure Advisory Services team at HKS in the Americas. And as Erica mentioned, I had the great fortune of being the treasurer of TEA and to have worked for many years on the annual theme index, which I know we're all eagerly awaiting. To start, I want to remind everyone that the purpose of today's webinar is to provide some perspectives on the reopening of attractions based on the experiences to date of the panelists. To be clear, we are not providing specific advice, nor are we endorsing specific actions for your facilities or your clients. Those are unique to your situation and the applicable regulations and authorities. Despite these caveats, today's webinar will be engaging and informative. And who knows, it might just become the first in a series as reopening continues and evolves over time. Joining me today is an extremely well-informed and experienced group, which truly spans the globe and also covers a broad portion of our industry and beyond. The panelists are Craig Hanna of ThinkWell Group, Sarah Campbell-Holton of HKS Advisory Services, Thorsten Kobele of Mock Rides, and Alan Mahoney of Atlantis Resort Samia. Before the panelists tell you a little more about themselves, I would like to provide some context for the discussion. All of us in the themed entertainment industry and beyond are feeling the impact of the pandemic, including the associated stay-at-home orders and the business operating restrictions, as well as the economic contraction. The impact of these is unprecedented in its global scale and broad nature, which makes it difficult to truly understand, but here's a little perspective. Global travel provides a good proxy for overall levels of activity in the leisure industry, including the themed entertainment industry. According to the United Nations World Tourism Organization, global travel has generally been on a steady upward trend over the last 20 years, more than doubling over this time. It's a great upward trend line, one which has benefited the themed entertainment industry tremendously. By contrast, that line turned downward globally in February this year, a direction we are not used to seeing. In March, international arrivals plunged by 57% versus a year before, equal to the loss of 67 million global arrivals, leading also to the loss of the equivalent of $80 billion in export revenues. This is an almost surreal reversal of the last 20 years, but the outlook at this point remains uncertain as well. UNWTO has developed, however, some forward-looking scenarios for the remainder of the year based on varying expectations and travel restrictions. In the best scenario, we might begin to approach normality towards the end of the year. In the worst scenario, we could see relatively little improvement until then. Based on this, global international arrivals could drop between 58 and 78% in 2020. This could lead to the loss of 1.1 billion international arrivals and the loss of the equivalent of 1.2 trillion in export revenues, which would put up to 120 million direct tourism jobs at risk globally. Beyond that, this also underscores the risk to the record-breaking 500 million visitors to the top attraction operators globally in 2018, as noted in the last theme index. And I know as well that many of you have been directly impacted by this terrible situation, some more seriously than others. Speaking on behalf of today's panel and your many friends in the industry, You have our support, and we will get through this together, slowly but surely. Okay, with that context in mind, we're going to take a few moments so that today's panelists can introduce themselves. During this, they will also describe the biggest reopening challenge that they are experiencing or that their clients are discussing with them. While the panelists speak, we're also going to ask you, the audience, to answer the same question so that you can know what your challenges are as well. You should have a pop-up window visible now or in just a moment. And please take a few moments and give us your vote. Rest assured, your votes are anonymous, but they're very helpful for today's webinar. The potential responses are by no means comprehensive since it's a complex situation, but hopefully we captured a likely top challenge that you are facing, and we'll show the results at the end of the panelist introductions. Okay, while that's going on, let's work our way around the globe, east to west, starting in China. Alan, can you please tell us a little about yourself and highlight the biggest reopening challenge that you faced at your resort and attractions? Take it away, Alan.
Hi everyone, I'm Alan Marnie. I'm the Vice President of Operations at the Atlantic Sunya Resort. Sunya is located on Hainan Island, which is an island south of China, and it's a tourist island which mainly attracts Chinese tourists and a small percentage of international tourists. As everyone's aware, the outbreak started in China, and going back to that time, it was a very difficult, very worrying time, and it hit us at probably the most critical time of the year. It hit us at Chinese New Year. So basically we we have the resort, and if you stay at the resort, you stay at our aquarium and the water park, which are our major attractions, plus of course we have World Cup guests, so it's our major time. But if you stay at the resort, you do get the water park and the aquarium. So our resort was getting to 100% occupancy. Then word came out, I think it was around 22nd of January, and pretty much by 26th of January, all the attractions were closed. The resort stayed open because people booked in and there at the resort we could not close, but we had to close down the operations. Our first thing was, most important thing was the safety of our guests within the resort, and secondly, the safety of our staff. Basically, we worked closely with the government to understand what was happening, and our biggest concern was to see if any of our staff had been in contact with people. We have staff dormitories, and we had up to 3,000 staff at the time staying there. We basically quarantined all staff in the dormitory, special quarantine of 50 staff who we felt might have been a chance of coming in contact, and we worked through that period, which was very critical to us to make sure our staff were safe. But what we found in China, that the lockdown worked very well, and especially on Hainan Island, because on Hainan Island, the government had the advantage of knowing who was coming in and out and controlling. There was, as being an island, they understand everyone coming into the area. So basically, we opened the aquarium within 6 weeks of the initial closing. And our aquarium was sort of the first one that we needed to open, because when you looked at the business operation, we had a large expense operating, such as our water park. When we closed our water park, everything is closed, there's no operating expense. So what we found, especially for our owners, one, we have to look at the safety of reopening safely, but also we had to look at making sure that we could generate revenue at the same time. So
Great. Thank you, Alan. Well, let's come back, and I'd like to now move over to Thorsten in Germany. Thorsten, can you tell us a little bit about yourself, and also talk briefly about the biggest challenge, both at your manufacturing operations, which I believe have remained open, and as you prepare to open your theme park?
Yeah, sure. So first, good morning to North America, good afternoon to Europe, and good evening to Asia. Hope every part is online here. So my name is Thorsten Kobele. I'm the Chief Officer, Sales and Marketing, and member of the Executive Board at Magrites, a German manufacturer of amusement equipment. And I'm with the company 23 years now, and my background is mechanical engineering. So, and within the MAG Group, I'm working for the manufacturing division, but as most of you may know, that we also operate the second biggest theme park in Europe, Europa Park. And therefore, I think I have insights on both sides, which I hope can provide some valuable information for all the people listening to that webinar. So talking about the situation here in Europe very briefly, I think we have later on a little bit more time to go a little bit more into detail. So Europe was affected beginning mid of March with the virus, and instantly different countries make different scenarios. Some countries lock down the entire, some do not. So luckily, we in Germany, we could run the facility, the manufacturing facility, with certain restrictions and provisions we have to take. But at least we didn't have to shut down the shop. Controversy to that, the park was not allowed to open the gates, what they usually do. So they have to keep closed. But the good news is for the moment is that the park will open 29th of May. So, and I think that's also something we make a lot of provisions and implementations, and we got restrictions from the government. I think that's also something which I can go a little bit more details during the webinar.
Great. Thank you, Thorsten. Coming to North America, Craig, in addition to being a great past president of TEA, can you please tell us a little about yourself and let us know what you see as the biggest reopening challenge for your clients who are truly global in nature?
Absolutely. Thank you, Brian. I'm Craig Hanna, Chief Creative Officer and one of the owners of ThinkWell Group. We have offices in Beijing, Los Angeles, Montreal, Riyadh, and Abu Dhabi. And for us, as experienced designers, most of our projects are more long-term. So they proceed without concern, because I think most of our clients are looking at what the day after tomorrow is going to be. And so those projects are all well underway in terms of business as usual. The more short-term projects that our clients are considering, I would say right now we're looking at a lot of real fundamentals. Entry gate layout and protocols. How are people going to move through from ticketing to mag and bag to temperature check and on into the park or attraction. Queue use is obviously of great concern to everybody. And so we're looking at redistribution of guests in an attraction or in a park. And then what does that mean? And what are the ramifications of that beyond the individual attraction? And then lastly, entertainment programming. In a reduced capacity scenario, that means a park will have a lot less revenue coming in. So looking at cutting soft programming like entertainment in order to help balance out that economically. So if entertainment is being cut and people perceive that cut as a negative, what can be done with entertainment then that works instead? On the museum side, it's determining how visitors need to move through those facilities. Can they just be let loose into the place like balls in a pachinko machine, or does there need to be a different scenario to do that? And that's both in terms of looking at it from a guest experience as well as operationally. So those are probably the top things that we're getting inquiries on that our clients are asking about right now.
Great. Thank you. Excellent, Craig. And I'm sure we're going to get down into some of those topics as well as from Thorsten and Alan also. Continuing with North America, Sarah, would you like to introduce yourself? And you're coming from the healthcare field. Can you provide us with some context about the parallel challenges being faced by your clients in healthcare and beyond?
Absolutely, Brian. So my name is Sarah Holton. I'm with HKS Advisory Services. We cover the globe. So I had calls earlier this morning for me with Jeddah and also with folks on the West Coast of the United States. I have 25 years in healthcare. My primary focus has always been in the most acute of patients, the surgical patients and trauma patients. And I'm also a researcher and a doctoral candidate in the area of critical events. I've been using that knowledge and expertise to talk to a variety of different sectors, so sports, including professional sports and collegiate sports, as well as aviation, and other hospitality and other entertainment type venues outside of gated attractions. The big piece that I see is a continuum across these efforts, as well as in healthcare, is the experiential focus, is the opportunity that we continue to study the link between or the balance, I should say, between providing a safe environment while not losing sight of the sense that these are spaces where people want to go for escape or for respite. So we're going to need to overlay that cultural study and also take into account that COVID, with all of our global travelers and experiences, is going to be very personal and very unique. And the way that individuals alter their experience may have to do with how they've been personally impacted. And this will need to be considered in terms of what's their tolerance or desire to have augmented safety measures in place, like queuing that Craig just mentioned, or sanitizing areas, et cetera. So these are challenges we're going to continue to study, and this is what I'm seeing reflected across the sectors.
Great. Thank you, Sarah. Let's take a moment to review what you, our audience, have indicated is the biggest reopening challenge. Many thanks as well to everyone who's voted. And Erica, can you display the results, please? Great, there we go. So as you can see, as was mentioned actually during our intro there by the panelists, new procedures and requirements are, and how they're impacting the guest experience comes out really at the top there. And then we see next after that, creating easy to understand safety procedures for staff and guests. So how to implement those procedures. The least highest ranked response there, I'm really glad to say, is obtaining PPE and the like. I know that was such an issue as the pandemic started, and it's really wonderful to see that has ebbed over time. I think with that useful context, let's shift a little bit here to talk about specific actions that are being taken. And with that, let's go back to China. Alan, can you talk a little bit about some of the key steps that you're taking in Atlanta Sanya, both to protect your staff, and then secondarily your guests. And maybe you could mention as well if there's anything that you consider to be unique to the Chinese market or to Asia more broadly.
Okay. Thanks for that. Look, it's very interesting, and people moving forward to say that making sure the guest experience, and that is very important, and what we've worked on as an operation. For terms of safety, our main thing has been temperature checks, which of course we do. Also in China, people need to update a safety code on their phone. So we also check the safety code, and they must have a green code to be able to be coming in. Let's take our water park for example. To get to the water park, they need to get to the car park, then come into the resort, then come to the water park. So that is in fact 3 different times that we do a temperature check. And at the water park, we look at the green code. Most importantly is the hand sanitizers that we have all around the park. We have set up hand sanitizing stations that, 1, people are using them, 2, it's showing people that we are putting something very safe into that environment. Thirdly, we do the queue line systems, that we have a measurement and the distances that is very difficult to monitor, because in reality, we're trying to make money, we're trying to run the operation, we can't really have staff fully monitoring that on a full-time basis. So what we do is we've looked at a way to operate with our ride attendants to be able to monitor that and keep it as well as possible, and we put someone at the front of the queue lines, which in a water park we need anyway, because we're weighing people for rides and attractions as well. So that's very important. I think the guest experience, what we've done is we've looked at a business, and in all honesty, for the water park, we've needed to rotate the attractions. So some attractions don't open within 2 hours of the day, and we've really put a plan together that we believe now is working very strongly to let guests feel like they're getting the whole park and they're feeling the whole experience. So if you look at one ride tower, we'll go from ride to ride to ride to ride every hour, which is a lot more work because we need to retest it, get our lifeguards moving, turn pumps on and off. But it gives the guests the feeling, and we've been talking to guests, surveying guests, and guests are saying they're still feeling very strong there. And most importantly, on our OTA channels, we're still getting very, very high guest satisfaction numbers. We're at about 4.9, and we have not dropped on out of
Great.
So I think getting the smart strategy has worked out well with how to rotate.
Excellent. Glad to hear that, Alan. You're a little ahead of the curve on us, so really glad to hear that those ratings are remaining high. Thorsten, what about at mock rides? What are key protective steps that you've been taking at your manufacturing facilities, and now that you're preparing to implement over at Europa Park, which will reopen soon? And is there anything that you consider to be unique, perhaps to the German or European market more broadly?
I think there are some specialities in Europe. So, I mean, as I said before, I have both insights talking about the manufacturing side. So, when we get affected in March, as I said before, so we reacted in a way that we sent those people home who can work from home. So we applied for additional online licenses that they can work from home. So we sent about 50 people home. But nevertheless, since we have a manufacturing division back of the house, so that cannot be done at home. So we have to keep that running. So therefore, we change shifts and try to get less people in one shift and turn around that we can still keep on moving. But in terms of the projects, you know, from a manufacturing side, you have the long-lasting project that helps. The parks, you know, all the parks, the operators, they went from 100 to 0 immediately. So, but nevertheless, we see a lot of suspensions and postponement of projects because of that. Not really cancellations, luckily. So, and then the challenge here was really, you know, to rearrange all the production plannings because this was put immediately upside down. So, and then very good experience we have done in that perspective is that, you know, we have to find solutions together with the customers. And our business is still very small, and this helps because you don't only have business relationship, you have most of the time also friendship. And therefore we work with our clients the best way, how we can move on this manufacturing, store the things for them, and still get some money and all this. So that was a little bit challenging to work around that, but that's we could work out in a way, make it fair for both parties. On the other hand side, we have the park, and as I said before, so we were not allowed to open the park, but now we got a permission that we can open the park in 29th of May. And I think the provision, there are, I think I can talk an hour about that, but I want to keep the key points, what we implemented or what the strategy is in general for that. So first, we have to reduce the number of guests can enter the park. So that's in relationship with the government, what we can allow. By doing that, we changed the ticket sale. It's only online ticket sales. So there's no ticket sale on site. To minimize the contact with people, and secondly, to control the number of people coming into the park. So this was open about a week ago, and we have very, very good bookings, which is a very good sign. So that tells me for Europe that people are willing to, you know, to start life again and going to an amusement park after that shutdown. So, and all these rules, with the distancing and the hygienic thing, I mean, they are all implemented. We have additional hygienic stations in the park, and we make some modifications in terms of that we are not operating the shows when we open the park, because that's challenging for crowd control and, you know, and this distancing rules. And we also minimize the indoor queue lines and try to move them to the outdoor section. And restaurants will open in the park, but certainly with reduced number of seats, so about 50% of that. And in terms of the rides, it will be in a way that we only allow one guest per row in the vehicles or in the trains, except you are family members, and the guests have to wear masks.
Great.
And all our staffs are also wearing masks and gloves, and we are making more efforts cleaning the railings, etc., as we can do.
Right.
A very, I think there are two outcomes because of this situation, which are quite innovative. So the first thing is that we are developed a virtual queuing app, so where people in the park can sign in for specific rides, and they get then a specific time and they have to show up. So that's how we try to control the queuing line at each individual attractions.
Right.
The second thing is we also working on an app which is kind of a gamification of distancing control. So you see on your smartphone when you have the app how you perform in terms of distancing to your neighbors, and then you get a kind of a reward program. So if you perform that well, you get a kind of a reward that you get a first line entry into a ride or something like that. So we try to make it a way to educate the people, but also in a gamification way and reward it. So, but that's under development right now, which will not be available when we open, but after that.
Great.
And towards what Alan, Alan has this experience, opening their his facilities. We don't. So we expect there will be a steep learning curve, and there will be multiple adjustments happening when we see how it's a new situation and we don't have experience with that.
That's great, Thorsten. Thanks for that. It sounds like you're adopting some very innovative approaches beyond kind of the things that we're hearing about and seeing in the industry. Craig, are there some steps or designs or maybe technologies that haven't been mentioned yet? Maybe anything that you're working on now with clients or expect to be doing so that perhaps you can talk about to add on to that?
Sure. It's pretty low tech, but graphics and wayfinding are key, and that has to be carefully balanced against graphic fatigue, because if you put up too many signs about do this and don't do that and stand here and don't stand there, eventually people ignore it all because they just glaze over. So trying to look at and consider the appropriate amount of signage and wayfinding to communicate what needs to happen and how this is all going to work is key. Our Montreal studio and R&D lab are working on touchless interactives, something that a lot of people probably don't think about. But if a lot of touch screens are the systems that we use to interface with from an ATM all the way to a museum exhibit or an interactive in a queue line or post-show experience, how do those work? And somebody the other day was discussing, well, you give everybody a stylus and then they can use that. But the minute that stylus touches that touch screen, that stylus is no longer safe. So the stylus really isn't a great solution. So gesture, facial recognition, motion tracking are all ways to create new interactives, but how can we retrofit existing interactives that previously have been touchscreen, and whether that is touchscreen mirroring on your mobile device or an API that allows you to do something else are things that we're looking at there. And then from an entertainment standpoint, how about a reverse parade? You put the parade out on the street and let people walk past it. And by pulsing people through that would be a way to allow that entertainment to happen, but on a much more controlled level. And then as an exercise, we're actually master planning a large-scale theme park that utilizes all of the current thinking and best practices, from safety to social distancing to queueless attractions, to see what that does to density and area development, what it means to retail and F&B, and what it does to attractions and queues. We're not saying you should build this park, but we're curious to see what does it mean when you take people out of the queues in terms of instantaneous capacity and put them out into a park, and how you have to accommodate for that in space layout and planning.
That's great. Good stuff, Craig, and a lot of innovative ideas that are coming through here. And it sounds like there's going to be some neat stuff coming up in our industry. And that's what we expect, right? We're a very, very creative industry. And also to Thorsten's point, we're also an industry of friends. And it's nice to hear about friends, helping friends out in the industry. That is really what it's about. Sarah, coming to you, what's being done or thought about outside of the themed entertainment industry? And I know your focus as well, as you mentioned on your doctoral study, is sort of about the transition from near-term crisis and reopening mode to longer-term operations. Maybe you can mention as well a few factors that should be taken in mind as we begin to make this transition.
Yeah, Brian, this is a great question. I would say, one of the things we want to frame this in is that the question is whether or not this is a sort of a sprint or a marathon. And so the ability, I think, when we, again, refocusing our attention on the people that are working in the park or existing in the spectator environment, et cetera. In the healthcare environment, we have had lots of conversation and discussion and years of research on something called compassion fatigue. And it really limits the ability of healthcare providers to provide the best possible outcome for patients or families or experiential because they're tired of performing at a certain level. And so when I spoke to some professional sports recently, one of the challenges that the coaching staff talked about is that they are on stage and they don't really have a place to get away. And so as they begin to continue to interact with the general public, their ability to keep that sort of shiny face on erodes. And so in all of these spaces, and as I mentioned before, even in the sports or in hospitality, it's the idea of creating a space that is off stage for the staff to recharge. So thinking about the intensity of their new service level expectations, whether it's providing instruction to the guests to say, remind them of social distancing or to remind them of hand washing, all of these things. And in some environments, it's really, that can be exhausting. And because, as I mentioned, that overlay of culture, depending on where the guest has come from and to the degree to which they've been impacted by COVID, may really have them be more needy of staff attention. And so that can be exhausting. So we want to think a little bit about, in order to maintain our experience and the high level that we expect from our attractions, as well as other things, is to really think about how do we maintain the wellness of our staff and our operators. It's something that I hear that across all sectors, and I think it's worthy of some attention.
Very good. I'm sure it's a big concern right now, for Alan and for Thorsten, and obviously for all of us who are managing our businesses that are client-facing, customer-facing, guest-facing, as well as, frankly, those of us who are just managing an office-based business. We all know that this has definitely imposed a level of fatigue, I think, on all of us. And some of these conversations like this are very helpful just so we can talk about it, let alone coming up with specific solutions. As we talk about all of these measures, it brings to mind questions about the willingness of guests to return. It's great to hear from Alan and Thorsten that demand is high, but it's kind of an interesting question. That is, under what conditions and under what capacities versus pre-pandemic are we able or should we expect visitors? With that in mind, as some of the operators have been doing, we'd again like to ask you, our audience, to take a few moments to respond to another poll. This time we ask that you respond to the question, how important are a range of factors, which will show you, to your decision to return to a park or other attraction for fun, not for work? We obviously all go all the time for work, but if you were going with your family or some friends, what are you keeping in mind as you make that decision? And you should have a pop-up window now visible on your screen, or it will be in just a moment. Please take a few moments to respond. And again, these potential responses are not comprehensive, but they should cover a wide variety of options. And we'll talk about your responses in just a moment. While you do that, we're going to ask about our panelists' experiences and expectations. Alan, let's come back to you, and maybe you can talk a little bit about the level of demand that you have been experiencing there at Sanya, at your reopened attractions, and what you're seeing as some of the associated drivers.
Yeah, it was very important for us to open and get confidence back into the market, and that, as I said, we were, I would say, the first attractions to open globally, and we are in a tourist market, which is important. So the fact was that the tourism was affected, but now what we're finding is we're getting a very strong. Now, as was mentioned, you need to work with the government, and our government restriction is at 30% of capacity. And we've only really came close over the May holiday period, where our 30%, we came in at just about 28% of capacity during that time. And we've found that we've been able to manage that very strongly and very smoothly. And we expect, while we're seeing this growth now, is what's happening in China is the fact that Chinese cannot travel abroad right now. They're traveling domestically. And with summer coming on and it's getting quite warm, what we will see is we believe that this summer holiday could be as high as expected, if not above expectations budget. Right now, we're probably sitting at 60 to 70% of our original budget. The hotel is picking up to over 70% on weekends and over 50 during the week. And the water park and aquarium is averaging about 1,800 a day and 2,500 on weekends. Now, why the increase on weekends? It's tourists are coming down and staying with the market. When we initially opened, even though we're a tourist market, we concentrated very highly. We did a few things on the local market, and we put some price attractiveness in the local market. We also worked with the healthcare industry. We flew in a lot of people, which was very strong for PR, invited them to the resort, had them also look at the measurements that we're doing for safety. So that became a PR message that we're operating as safe as we can. And the fact that we're helping giving thank you to the medical association made it very also a strong PR point. Thirdly, because we're a tourist destination, airlines are struggling. So we worked with the local airlines, and we worked with the one local airline, and what we've done is we've been chartering flights and working on tickets with them. So we package an air ticket with the hotel. And that's been very, very successful for it as well. So that's how we've gone out into the market. As I said, it's been a slow and steady increase. We started to do a few promotions over the last holiday periods, and it's worked quite successfully. But again, we need to limit our capacity and not go over those capacities. But we're comfortable with that because the tourism is down for what it should be right now. But we are starting to see an increase. And to add a positive to people around the world, especially in the States, I know the feeling right now. It's horrible. It's like a nightmare. But there's a bright sunshine on the other side. I feel that we're there now. I walk around comfortably without a mask, and the way things have moved forward, and we opened the park. As in customers, how they feel, the water park is definitely doing stronger than the aquarium. And the reason that we feel is because the aquarium is an indoor environment. And when you're there, you do see guests wanting to be away. They're making that 6 meters. Don't worry. The guests are very conscious. But in the water park, in open air, you can see guests are a lot more comfortable, and they're a lot more relaxed in the indoor environment.
Great. Thank you for that. And very glad to hear sort of the positive return there, and that you're also managing financially perhaps a little better than expected. Thank you, Alan. Thorsten, what about your end? You talked briefly about Europa Park, and mentioned that ticket sales have been very good so far. What do you think is driving that? Are there any particular factors? Is there anything at your end that you've done that's causing this fairly strong return to demand that you expect?
Well, we don't have this experience like Alan have right now because the park is not open yet. So, but we feel that we are very good prepared for that. And I think it needs a little time to get confident to the guests, those who are coming, willing to come. And then when they get responded to their friends that it works out very well, so then we hopefully get more demand on that and can adjust ourselves a little bit better to handle a bigger group of people. And also right now, due to the pandemic, that we have the closed borders, and we are located in right between Switzerland and France, and it's very challenging to cross borders at the moment. So, but this is supposed to also getting loosened within the next couple of weeks, what we hope for, and then we get a better demand on that. So let's say the experience we have in the park right now, they are not there. We have to learn on that. From the manufacturing side, we have to say, when we start, what really good learnings is on that, we send all these people home. And so 50 of them, and it was really impressing to us from the management how self-confident, how self-responsible they work from home. So, which was not expected. So that works quite well. Certainly, you're not reaching the 100% efficiency, but that was really a good learning we see from our people here what they do. And since the wave starts from east to west, and now it's also getting more calm from east to west. So we see businesses picking up also in that directions. People, also our clients, get used to the situation as it is and try to go back. What's coming in the future. So that's very that's the sun start rising again, that people, get in contact and see, there must be something after that. So that's good to see. But we have a long way in front of us to get back to normal life. That's definitely for sure.
Yeah. Thank you for that. And good luck with the opening. We, certainly hope things go as smoothly as possible, and you do see a return to your capacities. And I think, as Sarah mentioned earlier, this is a marathon. It's not a sprint. Indeed, it's going to be a process over time. Thank you, Thorsten. Returning to the poll results, Erica, can you show the responses to the question? Okay, so we can see that the wearing of masks is the top factor here, and there were multiple responses that were possible here. We can also see that the next highest would be if a generally available and vaccine were out there and the population was generally immunized as well. In addition, other high-level factors there are, of course, social distancing, keeping 6 feet, and the like. And most of the other measures came out, relatively high. It looks like the use of barriers and walking directions is a little bit lower, and that maybe speaks a little bit to Craig's comment that we're all kind of over-fatigued about sort of the directions that we may be being given about what to do. I just want to mention in relation to those poll results that for comparisons purposes, as some of you may have seen, Six Flags has been conducting surveys of its season pass holders in the U.S. Reportedly, 80% of those surveyed would return to the park if health and safety measures were implemented, a variety of measures, including some that we talked about there. Interestingly, or remarkably, I would say, even so, half of the pass holders said that they would return to the parks today if they were open, apparently with no measures taken. That's a little bit of a surprise. However, I want to be very clear to note that Six Flags has stated and has indicated very clearly that it will be following all applicable regulations and guidelines in implementing many of the procedures that we just had up there on the poll. Okay, let's turn to the design implications a little bit. I guess, looking a little bit towards the future, beyond immediate measures like those that we just talked about, and then we're hearing about in the media from various operators, this is clearly a situation that has a high potential for sort of an ongoing impact from this pandemic, as well as the potential for future pandemics going on. So with that in mind, I guess, Craig, could you tell us about some of the implications that you and your team are considering for new or renovated attractions, particularly in terms of changes to designs or operations? And I know you mentioned a few, but maybe there's a few additional ones as well that you're thinking about looking forward. Sure.
Well, in addition to the touchless interactives, which I keep coming back to because it's going to be a key issue. One of the things is not just what is required, but what are people's comfort levels. And if you think about a queue and the switchback queue, you're constantly walking past the same person. I was looking at some of the comments going by on the screen, and compliance is a key issue to the success of any of this working, right? And so even if we get to a point where people are much more relaxed about this, comfort, psychological comfort is really important. And so queues may be one of the most impacted things for a long, long time. So we think about queues in terms of storytelling, and how is story and immersion going to be delivered in a queue if you don't have a queue? And so if you don't want to starve the load of an attraction, it's going to be key to figure out how to pulse people through an experience, pre-experience, before your ride, show, or attraction, if you have story and immersion as part of that queue. And how do you deliver those key backstory points, the setup, all the things that we need as a guest and as storytellers to understand what we're about to do and why we're doing it. And so those are big implications that are going to be facing all of us as we look to telling stories and immersing guests before they actually get onto a ride or see an attraction. The other big thing about all of this, as I touched on before, as we were talking about ThinkWell designing this prototype park in a post-coronavirus world, is accommodating that extra circulation space. So we just, everything requires more space. If you don't have a queue, you need more space in the area development. If you want to keep your retail sales and restaurant sales high, you need either a bigger space or reduced capacity. And all of this have implications, as I'm sure Thorsten and Alan are dealing with, because we have really three ways to deal with all of this: reduce your capacity, extend your hours of operation, or create larger dwell spaces. And two of those are operational and one of them is physical. And all of those are things that holistically have to be looked at together for what happens next.
Very good. I like that. Those three factors. That's really helpful framing. Sarah, anything that you would like to mention there in relation to kind of design implications that maybe are either coming from the healthcare field that perhaps should be taken into consideration, or with some of your clients from other industries?
Yeah, and I think I would just echo again what Craig was saying in terms of the need to kind of really think about this. The queuing is very critical, potentially, to the cultural understanding of kind of how are people going to feel safe and comfortable in the environment. I mentioned previously the idea of respite spaces, and these would be something that may be focused on staff or operators, people on the sort of the offstage spaces for them to recharge. But these also might be reflected within the environment for the guests as well. In recent conversations with aviation, as an example, we talked a little bit about the amplification of sort of the curbside pickup and the delivery, sort of direct to delivery or contactless delivery services, if you can say that 6 times fast. The idea is that service is becoming more personal in many ways. So you might have an example in aviation where they've decided potentially to, for the time being, stop using overhead compartments on airlines, because in the process of putting my bag over your head, I'm breathing right down on top of you. And so what does that do to us? That means that we maybe have to check more bags at the curb, and we also might instigate the idea of having services where bags are delivered to you at your resort, rather than having them wait in a queue in the area down below where you arrive. The idea too is to think about, would I purchase a space in the environment where I could go and have my meal with a family? So if I go through an attraction where I can pick up a food and beverage, would I want a small waiting area that is just carved out for, say, 6 people or 8 people, where we could sit a little bit off stage from everyone? These are just things to think about, I think, in terms of creating those environments where people can create a balance between being within the larger population of people that are in an attraction and being off stage a little bit on their own. And I think that also takes into account their individual readiness to intermix with lots of people.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you for that perspective and some interesting thoughts there to take into consideration. That's kind of the extent of the questions that we had sort of pre-set up for the panelists to talk to. I did also receive over the last few days quite a few questions from other people as they saw this webinar as being available. And clearly, I'm looking at the time, we're not going to get to those. Hopefully, we'll be able to do, say, a post-webinar Q&A. But I do have one question I think we have a little bit of time for here, and I think it's something that's probably on a lot of people's minds, which is what are the top criteria that you would suggest to operators or business managers and the like for evaluating whether and how to reopen? Maybe 2 or 3 things just kind of quickly to think about, to keep in mind. There might be a few things that people haven't necessarily thought of. And I think, Alan, would you like to start us off here, bringing your operator's perspective and also your experience so far, identifying 2 or 3 key criteria that people should take in mind here?
Yeah, no, definitely. And I was reading some of the questions, and I'm going to address that back to 3 questions. I saw masks come up. I know I mentioned I didn't have a mask today. I wasn't working. I was at the beach. But all staff are in masks. Of course, in the aquarium, it's in indoor, all guests must wear masks. In the water park, the current law in Hainan, in outdoors, people must have a mask available. Of course, they can't ride them on water rides, but we do see people still wearing them as they move around the rides, especially 6 weeks ago. Now, not as much. Outdoors, we're seeing the mask going, but indoors, we're very, very strict. Masks must be worn. China, everyone carries a mask. It's the way it is, so we don't have problems. But we did design our own mask that we sell in case people do need to get a mask. Secondly, about cleanliness. Let's look at the aquarium, because that's where, it's an indoor environment. Any area that we find people touching, such as bathrooms, elevator lifts, the escalators, we clean every 15 minutes. So we do that. And also the aquarium, while I'm working with the government, we close for 1 hour in the middle of the day for a full clean. So that's one area. Third thing that I think is most important is financials. We are running profitably right now. And the most important thing, let's look at the water park. We looked at every attraction, every staff member, every operating cost, and we basically broke it down to hour, how much every part of the park costs. So we understand our costs. We understand the numbers that we're doing. We are discounting because we're not operating all the rides at once. And we've looked at it. So we know exactly how much our operating day will cost. We can run our revenues, and we're doing very, very well. Very important, our staffing coming into it is not all staff can work. It's the most important cost is our labour. And it's our goal to keep all of our employees employed. The last thing that we understand, and we feel if we start to lose money, our owners are going to deliver to us, okay, cut costs, first place is cut, cost 20, your staff are gone. That's going to be the directive. So it's very important. So even senior management, such as myself, we're at 80% of salary and working at 80%. And what we've done amongst our staff, an example for our lifeguards, our major source of staff for the water park, they're averaging 51% of their working time when we rotate them around, because we're limiting our staff numbers, but we're keeping everyone working, everyone doing, and that's important. We want to come out of this with not putting off staff, and we've managed to do that, and I would say we will move forward and do that successfully.
Very good. Very good. Thank you. Thorsten, 1 or 2 points that you think should be taken in mind from a manufacturer's perspective, let's say in terms of either keeping operations open or reopening manufacturing or supply operations?
At the moment, I think most important, it's still the case that you have to, you have to stay with your customers and not, try to sell rights momentarily. So it's more kind to create a friendship together with them and help them also with the experience we are right now develop, and we will have soon in our parks to help them with the experience we have there. And also, I think what we have seen from some customers is they have a year-round park, so they are not too used to reopen their park. The seasonal parks, they are used to that situation. They have closed the park and reopened, and they are a little bit right now concerned or afraid what I have to do. So that's something we also help them to get specifically the rights we are having in the park to get them ready for reopening. And since everybody closed down this facility, so we expect there will be a high demand on spare parts as soon as they have opened, because there's no spare part business at the moment. Nobody's there. And we try to prepare ourselves that we can react accordingly, And from the park sides, I think, we have to learn. And I believe most important is that you get confident, the people feel confident, those who visited the park. And I think even more, you have to listen to the reaction of your guests and react accordingly. That's what you always do, but I think it's getting more important now to get that feedback. And I think to come up with creative ideas like these apps I previously said, talk about and surprise your guests. So I think that's the things and then you have to instantly be prepared to adjust your operation. The learning curve will be very steep. So, and you have to be very proactive and, very to adjust yourself to get back sometimes to normal life.
Very good. Very good. Thank you. I know we are coming up here to the end of our webinar. It's gone amazingly quickly, but I just want to mention before we start to close out here that on screen are a few resources that you may want to consult if you haven't done so already for additional information. We'll include this with the list in the TA weblog entry about this webinar, which will be posted in a few days. I also would very much, first off, like to say thank you to the audience today for sharing your time and your thoughts with us. I'd also like to thank Erica and Jenny at TA headquarters for helping us to produce this webinar, and to the rest of the TA leadership teams across the globe. Thank you for your support and all the hard work that you're doing. Finally, many thanks to the panelists. You've all been wonderful, and I so appreciate your willingness to share your experiences here and your perspectives with others in the industry. With that, I'd like to ask the panelists to each say a few final words, and if possible, to note any positive outcomes from the attractions industry in the long run from this very tough situation. And again, we'll just go around the globe here. Alan, do you want to lead us off with just a kind of a closing word and maybe a positive thought as well?
I think the most important thing, as I said, for us here in China has been working with the government and following their guidelines, and that's been the most important thing of being able to open. And again, you know, there's a bright side at the end of this. I know it's difficult times, and I'm sure people in very difficult situations. I was in that situation 3 months ago. I understand it very, very well. But it's taken a lot of hard work. We've treated our team as we're family, and we've worked on this as a team, as a family, and we're seeing some very good results. I think I want to finish with that positive. I know a lot of people feeling down now, but there's a bright ending to it.
Great. Thank you very much, Alan. Thorsten, how about you?
Yeah, I mean, we find ourselves in this situation suddenly, but I can say that here in Europe, things seems to be, getting better now. And I'm a strong believer in saying, this special, extraordinary situation also results in very innovative ideas. Sometimes you need this kind of, special situation that you come up with new ideas. And I think we have some good examples right now, what we're going to do in the park. And also from the manufacturing side, I think suddenly, since there's a lot of project postponed, we had some spare time here to think about the ideas we had in our minds before, but we haven't had time to, to more look into that. So we have really made a good progress in further develop new ideas on that. We try to use that time. Right now, there's no profit out of that, certainly, but we try to use that time to develop ideas a little bit further, that it becomes sooner to a product which is then available to the market. So I think it's
great.
And as I said before, really what I really learned is that the friendship with our customers is really enhanced due to that. So we are in the same boat, and with everyone, we find a very solutions working for both sides. So that makes me very proud that this really, that our industry come together even closer with that. So,
excellent. Thank you, Thorsten. Sarah, what are your final thoughts here?
Sorry, I was muted. So I think the final thing is just as people are rolling out their ideas and they're capturing what's important to their clientele as well as their employees, is to really describe those steps in a very consistent way and over communicate them. So if we think about the phases that will open up, increasing that communication to our guests is really critical so that they know what to expect. What I think has been really positive is that people are really thinking that what is possible. So just as what Thorsten just said, is the idea is that there's so many ways that we can solve this problem. And if we all get together and think about it, we'll come up with some really novel ones. And then the idea is to share them amongst us. And I think we'll be in a very positive place in the next little bit of time.
Wonderful. Thank you, Sarah. Finally, Craig, I think you have the longest tenure in our industry of the panelists and maybe the broadest perspective. What are your final thoughts here?
Well, from a personal standpoint, I would say I think this is a for now situation. And I really love to believe that once we get a vaccine, then we're going to have a normal as opposed to the new normal. And things are going to go back to something resembling normal. Last but not least, because you said you wanted something positive, if a park or attraction's capacity is limited, doesn't that make the experience more exclusive? And shouldn't that be exploited as a positive instead of seeing it as a negative? I mean, look at Discovery Cove. They charge a premium for that exclusivity. Just something to think about.
Wonderful, wonderful. I love that idea. I think I actually think that's a really good approach, and I think we'll see that going forward. So thank you, Craig, and thank you again to all my panelists. You're wonderful. Really appreciate you taking the time, also the audience. And in closing out, I'll just repeat a very brief but helpful quote from a good friend, which is, be calm, be brave, and look for the signs. Okay, bye-bye for now. Thank you very much, and go TEA. Bye-bye.